This is the Resonant Identity, a podcast about personal growth, identity, and transformation. And I'm Terrence Waters. If this show resonates with you, I invite you to share it with those that you care about and resonate with, and invite you also to follow the show anywhere you follow your podcasts, like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Spreaker. If you enjoy the show, we also invite you to leave a review and also follow the show, as it does help us frame future episodes and helps get the word out. You can also reach us on our website at resonantidentity.com. Just a quick note before we begin, AI did help us generate this episode, and I personally reviewed and verified every part of it before publishing. At Fluxline, we believe in responsible, transparent AI usage and take full accountability for everything that we publish. You can learn more about our policy at fluxline.pro/legal and click on the option that says responsible AI usage. And finally, the Resonant Identity, of course, is an educational and reflective framework and is not a clinical service. And if you're navigating significant emotional distress or mental health concerns, please seek support from a qualified professional. Now that we got the legal stuff out of the way, so let's get started with this episode. And it's really cool to being able to say that, hey, I have reached 10 episodes and have been getting a lot of good feedback on it. Been getting a lot of information from people and getting some really good stories and feedback back, and really understanding how people are actually deciding to embody their ability to understand their identity, work toward self-regulation, and being able to quiet their actual emotional tones so that way they can make better choices and decisions in a widened window of choice. It's been really cool to being able to hear some things. So I really appreciate the feedback that I'm getting so far. And it is already growing. I am seeing some traction in a lot of different areas. I'm also happy to report that we actually now have this on YouTube. So if you do prefer just having things in the background, you can also check that out at YouTube on our channel, which is called A+ in Flux. That is all spelled out. And you'll see options there for the Resonant Identity where you can follow along, where it also gives you transcripts of the information so that way you can follow with what we're talking about here. We're now ready to go into what we call core value 2 of the Resonance core framework. So remember last time we did talk about specifically embodied awareness and also all the things that roll up into it, which that includes somatic cueing, emotional cueing, understanding things about our vast unknown of our mind, how to align with our identity of who we are and what we want to become, and then taking all of that and ensuring that we regulate our bodies and our minds so that we make appropriate decisions under an expanded window of choice. We've been talking about that over the past 8 episodes. And from here, we'll then be able to go from here and start understanding core value 2. So when I talk about embodied awareness going forward, please understand that that's what it means, is that it is an embodiment of all of the values that we have talked about in the first 7 episodes rolled up into one, meaning that we exercise the ability for us to being able to regulate our bodies, ensure that we are present and grounded, understanding that we're making decisions from a data-driven decision lens, rather than being reactive, exercising embodied and emotional intelligence so that way we pause before we actually make a decision, and leveraging interpretive hygiene to shift us into a data-driven decision-making lens so that way we can question what we are experiencing in the moment before we decide to act on what is happening in front of us and within ourselves. So when I talk about embodied awareness, that rolls up everything into one, so that way we can make it easier for us to being able to move on to the next lesson. So this lesson, what we're going to be talking about altogether is what's called Modular Precision, which is now understanding what we stand for and why, and taking those things as part of our lives for what it is we want to believe in, and leaving behind those things that don't serve us. Because when we want to embody our identity, not only do we want the ability for us to being able to understand who we are and who we want to become, but we also need to embody it in terms of what we stand for, why we stand for those things, and how we embody that in terms of our window of choice when we make decisions. And the first step to that is this title of the episode, which is our value and virtue system, which is taking the things that we value most and finding ways that we can embody those values through actual action. And what we'll then talk about in the next episode, just to preview real quick, is what is called a drive, which is a specific process that we take to action on those actual items from our value virtue system. Because once we define our values, we then are able to embody them in virtues and then take specific actions that are very small, but still embody who we are and what we stand for. But in order for us to being able to talk about drives, we do need to understand the value virtue system first. Understanding how it applies to our lives, how it embodies us, how it changes us, and how it always is a fluid process that seems to just keep moving forward in the new things that we understand in our lives and the things that we uncover in the vast unknown of our subconscious mind. Now, keep in mind when we talk about these topics that we're not simply bringing about any specific objectivity or offensiveness or anything like that sort, because some of the topics that we will get into in future episodes will seem a little concerning, right? Because we do view things in different ways that may actually come against who we are. It's always so to keep in mind that when we talk about the resonant identity and the resonance core framework, that's what it's meant to be, a neutral process by which we embody and choose what we want to become and what we want to stand for. And notice that I said what we want to, not necessarily what we do, because we choose how we want our bodies to act. We choose what we want in our world, and we choose who we are and what we stand for. That is something that no one else can take from you. And that is not anything that anyone else can define for you either. So when we talk about our second core value called modular precision, that's exactly what we talk about. Before we talk about values, though, I do want to explain exactly what modular precision is, because as we move forward in understanding what values and virtues are, and also what lesson 2 is about, modular precision is at the forefront of all of it. So when we talk about modularity, what does that mean? When we think about modules, when we think about things in terms of pieces, the best way that I can describe it is understanding how to put together a Lego set. So when you had a Lego set or you had a puzzle piece of all these different things, you were at the forefront of understanding how you wanted to put those things together. You may have had like some blueprints or some information that told you how to build what it is you want to do, but you were the architect in understanding and putting out what happens when you build that Lego set. If you follow the blueprints exactly, of course, you're going to look and see exactly what it looks like. But as you start playing more with Legos, you then start to understand that you can build all sorts of different things, even outside of the blueprint. That's because the more that you grow in experience and understanding what it is you can do with Legos, why you can do those things with Legos, and what works and what doesn't, that's where you can start to experiment a little bit, where you can maybe take from different Lego sets and different things and start to calculate and build new things that aren't even part of the blueprint. And that's the cool part about Legos or building really anything that involves architecture. So that could include software coding, that could include cooking, that could include how you decide you want to build your yard, or actually the information that's in your car, like the different car parts. They're the exact same principles. Because as you start to learn more and more about what the framework and the tools that you have available to you are available there, you can then pick and choose what makes sense for you. And the same thing applies to the resonant identity and the resonance core framework from which it's built off of. Modular precision gives you the empowerment to being able to build your life how you want it to be. No one else. The joy of the resonance core framework is that you are given the blueprints and you are given the choice of how you want to use the tools. And that's really empowering for you because no one else does that. Not your religion, not your politics, not your culture, not your work, anything. You are the one that gets to architect what your life means. Now, of course, there are those limitations. And yes, we will talk about things like cultural awareness, socioeconomic factors, third world circumstances, issues that may prevent you from being able to make choices. That definitely does occur. And we'll talk about that later as we get into guardrails. But as you understand it from a basic process, there are certain things about yourself that only you can define and only you get to decide what those embody. And that's what modular precision is. It gives you the empowerment to being able to architect your life how you want it. So as we talk about the value virtue system and going forward, keep in mind that all of these tools that we're going to be talking about now from a place of embodied awareness give you the ability to architect your life how you want it. Because at the forefront of the resonant identity and the resonance core framework is one person. And one person only. You. You are the architect of what you want in your life. You are the architect in deciding what makes sense to embody, what you stand for, what your identity looks like and why. And it also gives you the empowerment to saying, no, I don't want that. And here's why. Because this is actually what my identity is about. It gives you that empowerment to say no. It gives you that empowerment to say yes. And it also gives you the ability of establishing your own truth through resonance, through an identity-aligned life that embodied awareness gives you. And so the more that you practice resonance and recognizing all of those things, the more powerful modular precision gets to be for you. Because then you could look at life and you get to look at your life of Legos, of processes, everything that's available to you. And you say, okay, I want this, I want this, I want this, and I want this. And I don't want that, and I don't want that. At its basic level, you are the architect of your life. And that's the power that modular precision gives you. Now that you understand modular precision, let's talk about values. The discussions for this lesson are found in my forthcoming book, The Resonance Core Framework, specifically talking about the value-virtue system and how it's defined. It also talks about virtue ethics, which was proposed by Aristotle. And it also borrows from Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People in terms of understanding and living a principle-centered life. We also talk about how to train your subconscious mind into understanding what value virtues are, and that comes directly from its book as well. You can find these references and other information as well in the show notes, along with additional references that you can find on our website on theresonantidentity.com. So when we talk about values, we're talking about something that really embodies things that make us feel good about ourselves, things that we stand up for, things that when we understand those actual values themselves, we have a recollection of really understanding what it is that we believe in when we hear those values. So some examples of those may include things like integrity, honesty, prestige, wealth, understanding, empathy. Simple words that give us a meaning to being able to say, yeah, I actually resonate with that idea. I resonate with being empathetic and kind to others. I resonate with understanding how to stand up for myself. I resonate with being courageous. I resonate in how I am creative, how I'm influential to other people, things like that. Very simple, abstract ideas that gives us a vague recollection of understanding how we might embody our identity through actual action. But here's the problem with values. They're vague. They're abstract. When I say that I am integrous, what comes to my mind and what comes to your mind are two completely different things. Some of you may view integrity in terms of being honest, true to yourself, virtuous. Other people may look at it as being in terms of who I am, how I stand up for what I believe in. Maybe not even necessarily what it means to be honest or true, because integrity means different things to different people. Same with honesty, same with values. And also, what makes it even more tricky is that our values themselves are usually adopted from our past life. They're usually things that we carry around from our past that really seemed at the time to resonate with us as a child, but may not necessarily mean what it is that we stand for today or in the future. Because as we evolve, we value different things. We understand that we believe in certain things, and we also tend to change what it is that we actually value because we grow from day to day to day, especially as we start learning more about ourselves and the vast unknown of our minds. And the more that we start to learn about ourselves and how we approach the world, our value system itself changes. And so because of that, we may value something, but it also doesn't necessarily mean that we're actually living those values, because they may be in direct correlation with something that we just don't actually embody anymore, especially when it's shrouded in distortion. And yes, I'm sorry to say that values themselves can be shrouded in distortion, especially if we happen to be embodying them in a way that is completely contradictory to actually what they mean. So when I say that values actually do create distortion and are sources of them, what does that actually mean to us? Because that's probably something that's a little shocking to hear, especially because values are usually something that make us feel good. They give us a value system, ensuring that we make decisions that are right with society and ourselves and the people that matter to us, right? Because this does sound a little concerning, but when you understand the actual reasoning for this, it actually makes a lot of sense. Because values become distortion when they're unexamined, when they become something inherited from our past or our childhood, rather than actually embodied or chosen for us. And especially when they're used as moral slogans, which is my most favorite one. When people say that they value everyone in tolerance, but then all of a sudden show actions that completely go against their value system, it makes you wonder why they actually see things one way, but then act another way. You've probably seen this with many different people, and I'm not calling out names or groups or anything. I'm simply saying that we all do this, that we do say that we embody a value, but when our actions actually show otherwise, people then start to question your truth and your validity of who you are. Because saying one thing and doing another thing really does show a lack of character and lack of awareness of something that we really do need to understand. My most favorite phrase that my mom would always say to me, or I've always heard from so many people, do as I say, not as I do, I think is one of the worst things you can tell a kid in any way, shape, or form. It completely tells a kid that it is okay to embody a value, but act completely against it. And it surprises me whenever a parent says this, or a teacher, or a mentor, or anything, because what you're literally teaching the other person is that a value doesn't mean anything. And it also doesn't actually mean that you have to even embody it. Because if you want to act however you want, what is the value system even there for? How could you say that you are tolerant or kind to other people while at the same time showing complete discrimination to other people? The truth is, you don't. You can't. That shows an actual lack of understanding about what a value is. And so, because of that, if values happen to be used in this way, especially when they are twisted into what our mind thinks that value means, that value is shrouded in distortion. And as a result, that's where misalignment then begins. Because we can view values and we can definitely say that we are valued in what it is that we believe in and what we stand for. But our actions are what the actual tell are for people. Because people will see that saying that you embody something, but then actually acting a different way, whether or not you're aware of it, and they will start to question your judgment. They will start to question whether you are someone who can be trusted or not. And unfortunately, when that happens, as we'll see when we go into the outward reach, expressing your decisions to other people, you need that trust in order to being able to make decisions that last and that also help you transform with other people around you to ensuring they land with maximum impact. So before we get to that point, we need to make sure that our value system aligns with our identity. And we're going to do that here in this episode by giving you instructions to how we can embody that, ensuring that our values are rooted in truth, not distortion, and how we can make actions aligned with those values so that way we live an identity coherent life as part of the Resonant Identity. You're listening to the Resonant Identity with Terrence Waters. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Resonant Identity with Terrence Waters. Welcome back. So we now have talked about how value systems, regardless of how well they may be intentioned, can sometimes be shrouded in distortion and cause issues in terms of how we believe ourselves to be and what we stand for. And where this stems from is what is called the misalignment problem, which is really understanding how our value system is misaligned in terms of our embodied awareness of ourselves. And this goes back to what we talked about in that actual core value in terms of how we experience resonance, dissonance, unawareness, decisions that are from a shrouded window of choice, things that show up in our somatic cues, our emotional intelligence, the judgments and narratives that we talk ourselves through, and also our inconsistency in how we actually make decisions based on what we believe to be true. This is where values become an actual understanding of data, because themselves, values are data points, and they do come from the vast unknown of our mind, just like anything else. And so if we can use that and target that piece of understanding and information, we can then look at our value system from a data-driven decision lens, just like we have been already, to helping us ensure that those values actually embody who we are and what we stand for. And you'll notice this through the slightest little bit of changes that you will experience as you talk with other people. For when you say your values as one thing, but then you notice that people are reacting to you differently in terms of your actions, that's the point where you want to then understand and pause. Because you'll also experience it internally. Because as you're making decisions, you'll start to notice that there's some dissonance occurring into how you value what it is you're experiencing and the decisions that you're making. Not necessarily that they're negative, or even not they're harmful to people in any way. It's those subtlest decisions that when you make them, they all of a sudden cause this little bit of churning in you. You notice that your internal system is off. Those somatic cues start firing. You start getting those shadow emotions that kind of make you feel fearful or confused. And you start experiencing some narratives that may describe something completely different, especially when you see yourself as a value, but you're trying to value something that actually is not aligned with who you are. Those are the moments where you want to use the resonance test to pause, to still being able to take those cues that you experience and then understanding of what your value system might be, and then start to be curious about why they seem to be off. Why am I experiencing this chest tightening when I make this decision? When I think about this value of creativity or integrity, why does it feel off to me? When I'm making this decision, even though I know that I believe in this case or think I believe in it, why do I still feel dissonance from it? Because when you embody a value system that actually embodies who you are, you naturally feel resonant with it. When you're honest and stand up for yourself in that honesty, and especially when it comes from a place of identity coherence and alignment, you naturally resonate with it. And you don't fear being honest with others because it's just part of who you are. The same thing happens with the things that you also value in terms of leisure activities, what you do at work, the family that you have, the friendships that you make. Those things also are rooted in your values because you resonate with those other people who embody those same values. That's where a lot of that comes from. And so from the summary point of understanding your value system, it's all simply in understanding your resonance and your dissonance as it relates to them. When you think about them, when you're making decisions that you believe are part of them, and it's understanding your regulation and your internal cues and narratives to helping you see if you actually are aligned with that decision and that value. And when you experience resonance, you already know that that's part of it. But when you experience dissonance, that's your cue to tell you to pause, to try to understand why, and to ensure that your value that you're thinking about actually is what you stand for. And if it doesn't, that's then where you can go back to it, which we'll go over that activity here a little bit later, to then challenge yourself why you do not embody that value, or if you do. And then from there, you can then decide through modular precision whether to drop it or whether to keep it. It's actually that simple. You're listening to The Resonant Identity with your host, Terrence Waters. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Resonant Identity with Terrence Waters. Welcome back. So now that we understand how to understand what values are, how they embody us, and what we need to do to ensure that they serve us or not through resonance or dissonance, we now need to understand how we could actually embody those values, what actions we can take to ensure that we are doing values. Because values themselves, as we talked before, are potential sources of distortion in our lives. And they also may not necessarily serve us because they could be borrowed from our past identity, which may not serve us today. And so what we also need to do is root them in not only what are we embody and what we stand for, but how we embody them, how we show up and stand up for what we believe in. And that's where virtues come into play. Now, this borrows from the virtue ethics process, what Aristotle has talked about, which is saying that when we adopt a virtue-aligned life, we are simply using what are called virtue ethics. This is the process by which we take the knowledge that we have of what our value system is, and then embody those values in actions. How we show up every single day in order to be able to say that we are aligned and we do embody this value. So when we talk about integrity, for example, that is a value, which is an abstract thought. But to us, our virtue system, which then takes that value and then looks into it and says, well, how do I actually embody integrity? And here's how I embody integrity as an example. I embody integrity by doing the right thing at the right time. Now, that still is a little broad, but it is still giving you at least a little bit more of an understanding of how someone might embody integrity. Another person who may value creativity, for example. Creativity, of course, could mean a wide variety of things. But how I choose to embody it is through my writing and through my podcasting, because I do value creativity every day. But then I also embody it through my virtue system by doing my podcast every week, by writing about the Resonance Core Framework, by writing and working on my PhD. And that also bleeds a little bit more into my intellectualism value, because I believe the same thing. I like to create knowledge. I like to learn knowledge and understand more about myself and the world around me. Do you see the difference? Because values on themselves can mean anything, because they're very abstract and do mean one thing to another around different people. But to you, your virtue system is how you can define what your actual values are, how you embody them, and ways that you can do that through specific categorization. And that's something that you have to come up with on your own, unfortunately. It's something that does take time and is not something that is simply set in stone either. Because our virtues and our value system always change in relation to who we are and what we stand for, the more that we learn about ourselves and our outside world. Because we do not want to simply embody something and make decisions on something that is misaligned and causes us distortion or dissonance. And what the value virtue system, which is now what we'll call it, is how we embody that value and remove the distortion from what the actual value we've defined is. Because virtues create clarity for us. They create a lot more of a grounding system from a foundational way of how we can embody the value system that we have. And it also gives us a rooted process in our identity through the Resonance core framework to being able to live those decisions and live those values through those categorizations we make. And not only does it anchor our identity in our lived behavior, because again, identity just simply to say that we're aligned doesn't work. We have to also show actions. It also shows others what we embody, because our actions are what people can see. Actions are what people judge us on, whether we like it or not. And so if we can use our value system and embody it through action, which is what the virtue system allows us to do, it shows people who we are. It shows people what we stand for, and it shows people why we do what we do, because it stabilizes our inner resonance and expresses it outwardly. And outward resonance, which we'll learn later as we start to work through outward decision making, is something that people can actually resonate with as well, which happens to allow us to being able to make relationships, because people then understand that your value and virtue system are aligned. And they're aligned with your identity because they come from that in place of embodied awareness. And also through modular precision, we choose all of that. We choose our value virtue system. And we're able to say, yes, this serves me at any given time. And conversely, we can take away something that would just no longer serve us, because that's what the Resonance core framework does. It's only the blueprints. It's only just the means of saying, this is what's available to you to make. It's up to you, the architect of your life. And just to finally close it up, values do sound fuzzy and good on paper, and they feel good, and they make us feel resonant in what it is that we want to embody, but they're just too vague. That's the really biggest thing to drive home here. They're very vague for us to being able to guide what behaviors we need to do in terms of our identity coherence and our virtue value system of what we stand for, because virtues give our canvas shape. They give us the categories by which we can make action. And to bring this down home before we go to our next break, I want you to envision an artist, because this is what will make it drive home. So when you think about an artist, a person just standard there with colors on a palette and a blank canvas, that artist is you. That artist is the person who gets to look at the canvas and say, what do I want to paint today? And the cool part is you get to decide what that looks like, because it works through the value virtue system. Your identity, of course, is you, which is you standing there as an artist, but the colors and the tools are what make up the value virtue system. And let me illustrate it for it, what it means. Think of those values as colors. They can be all sorts of different colors that show up on your palette that you're holding up. They can be mixed together. They can be grouped together. They can be taken off the palette. There's many things that you can incorporate as part of your own color system. But the problem with values is they just stay on that palette. They will not do anything for you, just staying there as you look at them every day. Those colors mean nothing to you. All they are what it is you want to use to create what your identity aligned life looks like. And that's where the virtue system comes into play. The paintbrushes, the sponges, the water, the ways that you can actually meld and make what shows up on the canvas by wielding those tools to bringing about those colors and painting your canvas of life. Without the tools, those colors mean nothing. They just stand there, look good on paper, and people might say, oh, great, that's wonderful that you are aligned with integrity and creativity and intellectualism. But if you're not using them, what good do they do? The answer is they don't. They stand there on a palette and you have just a blank white slate just right in front of you with nothing on it. It's up to you to take the tools and the paintbrushes of your virtue system and paint those colors on your canvas. And also, to be fair, you're not going to get it right. You're going to make some mistakes. You're going to realize that there are some decisions that unfortunately don't 100% align with those colors. But the more that you practice it, you naturally align with them anyway, because you start to understand the distortion be based on your embodied awareness that your body will automatically signal to you that something is off. And that's why it's important to also have the embodied awareness system, because that is going to be what tells you inwardly whether you are aligned or not in your decisions and your value virtue system. You're listening to The Resonant Identity with your host, Terrence Waters. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Resonant Identity with Terrence Waters, and welcome back. So now you're starting to see how values really do shape the way that we stand up for what we do. And virtues now you understand are the ways and how we can embody those values every day as you define them as part of your canvas and what it is you decide to paint on it using those value virtue systems. But now you're going to start to see a little bit of a gap here, which is something that Aristotle and his virtue ethics process left off a little bit. Not to his discredit, he actually is a very amazing person, but you can start to see that there's a little bit missing out of this process, because even with our awesome value system that we have trimmed down, we know that we are aligned, and now we're also deciding that we have categories of how we can embody those virtues. You're now starting to see that there's a small little gap, because identity in this case will still stall, because how you actually choose to wield those tools, those paintbrushes and sponges, is the part that's missing. Because we can categorize podcasting and music and reading and understanding and PhD work however we want. Those are just categories. That does show us how we can embody our value system, but it doesn't show us what specific actions we need to take. Because I can say that I'm going to be a podcaster. Well, what does that mean though? Am I a podcaster in identity? Am I a podcaster in sports? Am I a podcaster just simply as a guest speaker, as a host? Both. You can see that there's still a little bit of some ambiguity there, because this shows us to being able to give that information of our value virtue system. You still have distortion in that even too, because if you define your value virtue system, what makes you think that you're still going to follow it? Yeah, you do have those tools available to you. And yes, you have that colors on the palette and you have your canvas in front of you. But how do you use those tools? Because those tools will sit there unless you actually physically pick them up and paint something on the canvas. And that's where we're going to go into the next episode, which is called drives. Because without those, if you do not have the ways of being able to say how to action, you're going to then notice that you're still going to stay stagnant. Your inaction is going to live in itself up. The potential for you to being able to actually wield those tools, if you don't use them on a daily basis, eventually die off. Because your value virtue system are just words on a page. It also means that your distortion starts to grow. Because as the more you start to just simply leave your value virtue system sitting there, over time, it's not going to mean as much to you. Because you then are going to start to transform into a new person. And then you're going to look back on it and even wonder what the hell they're about. Because resonance is also something that has to be expressed. It's not just simply something that feels in terms of alignment. Resonance is an expression of your identity. It's not just simply an alignment of it. Because when you are living an identity coherent life, your actions that you are exuding will actually grow your resonance and lower your distortion. Because those are the things that bring you about joy and coherence and understanding of who you are becoming, your transformation, and what you stand for and why. And so to talk about this, I just want to preview the next episode, just so that you can understand a little bit of where this is coming from. Because as we go into the practical exercise after the break, this is what you're going to need to start preparing yourself for. Because a value virtue system definitely needs to be defined. You still need those things in your actual psyche and in your identity aligned life. But in order for us to be able to use them, you have to wield them using what's called a drive. So a drive, by the way, the word, if you are picturing that word, I'm referring to it as a noun, not as a verb. This is a resonant core framework specific tool. This is a construct that actually is aligned with ways that you could embody your value virtue system through actions. So drives, which is spelled capital DRIVES, all in capital letters except for the lowercase s. A drive stands for a directional, repeatable, identity-aligned, virtuous expression. Now, what the hell does that mean? In other words, a drive acts as the activation point of your value virtue system. It acts as the way of how you can be carrying out small, repeatable behaviors that align with those value virtue systems that you have. They literally are how you embody your identity. Because as we know, identity alignment and transformation comes from action. It does not come from inaction. And drives are how you get there. They are the way that you decide how to pick up the tool and know what to paint on the canvas and actually paint on the canvas so that you're doing something. And it also acts as the engine of transformation, because the more that you act on your value virtue system, the easier it becomes for you to understand what those are, because they are embodied as part of who you are through action, not just simply saying that you are aligned and rooted in who you are and through resonance. This is the preview that you'll need to understand. So before we go to the break, I just want you to understand that case, that as we're about to then define your value virtue system, drives are the ultimate goal. Those are the actions that we need in order to being able to sustain, embody, and transform into who we want to become, aligned with who we are and what we stand for. You're listening to The Resonant Identity with your host, Terrence Waters. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Resonant Identity with your host, Terrence Waters. Welcome back. So now finally, what we're going to do is handle our 7-day challenge, which is the practical exercise for creating our value virtue system. Now, I asked you in the previous episode of Embodied Awareness to ensure that your identity has been as best as you can flushed out. And when I talk about that, I mean understanding who you were, who you are, and who you are becoming and want to become. Now, you may not have that 100% flushed out, but you do need at least a good understanding of your identity before you move forward. Embodied awareness is the prerequisite to this lesson. So if you haven't gotten to that point yet, please stop and work on the options of inner alignment and then embodied awareness through the prior episodes, because you do need that before you can go through this process. And the reason for that is because our value virtue system needs to be rooted in a very strong understanding of self, who we are, who we want to become. Because we can say that we have a value virtue system as well, but our identity is also what roots it to ensure that we're making aligned decisions in who we are, not just simply what we believe in. They're a two-part system. So please stop the episode, please go back and ensure that you have a firm understanding of that and go through that exercise before you do this. Now, this exercise is borrowed from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's a wonderful book, and I recommend that you read it because it gives us more information about how to live what's called a principle-centered life, which is how this is somewhat adhered to. It does take information from that specific exercise in the first part of its book, but we expand it a little bit later in Drives, as we mentioned before, because it also embodies virtue ethics, which comes from Aristotle. And then also, I recommend that you read what's called the How to Train Your Subconscious Mind, how to activate it. There are certain words in that book and phrases that you can utilize to give yourself more room to being able to understand your value virtue system. Because as you go through this exercise, you're going to experience some distortion in some of the things you write down. You're going to experience some questioning, some shadow cues. And it's also going to be difficult because, as you'll see, I'm also going to be asking you to really, truly define what they are in very simple, easy to understand terms, which means you're going to have a little bit of a self-shock. I'm just going to be honest here. So recognize that this process is part of it. This is important for you to do because the more that you can embody your actual value virtue system aligned with your identity and rooted in it, the better that you'll be able to live an identity coherent life while standing up for what you believe in. So here's how it works. What you do, and you're going to do this over the next 7 days. This one's not split by days this time, just because it does take some time on this case. I first want you to perform a grounding ritual. This is what we do to prepare the mind and calm the body before we want to do something with intention. So that includes our grounding exercises, meditation, ensuring you are somewhere that will not cause you problems, ensuring that you are in a place where you will not be distracted or interrupted. I usually like to go to a park. Sometimes I'll even close the door to my office if I can't leave, things like that. And what I want you to do is grab a pen and paper, leave the phone at home, turn off the devices, maybe put on some soft music if that helps you. Just ensure that you are 100% present before you start. And what I want you to do is on that pen and paper, I want you to write down 30 values, anything that comes to mind. It doesn't have to be accurate. It doesn't necessarily have to be understood. Just whatever comes to your mind from your heart and also from your mind and your nervous system. And your nervous system will automatically push them up. You'll start to notice them. They'll come up in narratives. Just write down whatever comes to mind. We're not at this point evaluating them yet because we need a really good level of values to come through. Once you've done that, what I then want you to do is a trimming exercise. I then want you to take that list of values and I want you to bring it down to 15, just 15 values. This is where you're going to need to exercise what's called some embodiment processes, identifying where those values came from, identifying if they still resonate with you, looking at them from a data-driven decision-making lens and interpretive hygiene to understand, is this something that I actually value right now? Because as we mentioned before, our values are usually adopted from our past life. Most of us really don't even give them a second thought. And so this process is a little hard because it does make you kind of go into your core and your identity to understand, do I actually embody this value? Because then after you've done 15, I want you to take down that list of 15 and push them down to 8. That is the last step of trimming. And that's where it gets even harder because you've picked 15 out of your list of 30 that you're already having to kind of dig deeper. And now you're having to dig even deeper because these 8 are going to be your value virtue system. No more, no less. Literally just 8. Those 8 values are then how we build the value virtue system. And these can always be amended at any time. Keep in mind, they're not set in stone. But for this exercise, that's what I ask for you. You do need to come up with 8 values and write them down. Now, this may sound easy, but I promise you, it's going to rock you to your core. It will. You'll start to question yourself. You may even experience some emotional and narrative cues. That's normal. That's part of the process. Because what you're experiencing in those moments are dissonance. You're experiencing misalignment. You're experiencing a rock of what it is you think you are versus what you are. And that's part of the process because this is where you're going to then ask yourself, do I embody this value? You're able to ask yourself where it came from. And you're then going to identify whether you resonate with it or whether there's dissonance. Now, keep in mind, regardless of what you experience in resonance and dissonance, you still need to fact check those through interpretive hygiene. You still need to look at them as data. Are you really resonant with this value and why? Why are you experiencing dissonance with this value and why? And do they align with your identity? If they do, in all cases with resonance and identity alignment, you keep it. If you're not able to reconcile the dissonance or the identity mismatch, you drop it. Remember that modular precision gives you that power to being able to say what you want and what you don't. And here's where it also gets tricky. Only you are defining these values, no one else. This may sometimes come from external sources, religious circumstances, cultural expectations, socioeconomic factors, political stances, ethic and moral values. That's okay, by the way. You can still borrow from those. But as you start understanding your identity, where you're going to start to see some holes are actually in what you value versus what the external bodies value. And we'll get into this more as we talk about guardrails. But do keep in mind that a lot of those values may actually not necessarily embody who you are. And it's okay to drop them if you feel that way. If you resonate with something else, you have permission. I grant you permission to drop it. If you feel that you're aligned with something, I give you permission to take it. There is no right or wrong answer here, only with what you personally say. And I'll give you a hint, by the way, because you will start to go through a little bit of that rock and a little bit of that core shakeup and also some cues. A logical way to process this is also to look at what is called grouping. Because as you start to write down some of these values, you'll start to see that there's a little bit of some similarities between some of them that could be grouped under one heading. So like, for example, you may talk about authenticity and honesty and kindness and things like that. But what you could actually do is take all of those and combine them into one value, which is integrity, if it resonates with you. That's a way to kind of help you a little bit avoid the really hard shakeup, but it also will help you be able to understand, oh, I can group all of these into this one because they still talk about all of them at once. That is a way to kind of get around it a little bit. But also, do pay attention to your cues as you do this. And then finally, the second step is we need to pair them with virtues, because you need to understand how you embody those 8 values that you have brought down. So when you take those 8 values, this should be the easy part. All you have to do is say, well, why do I resonate with this value? Why does it speak to who I am and what I stand for? How can I embody those values? So if you were to take creativity, like in my example, I wrote down podcasting, writing, music, and theater. Those happen to be the 4 ways in which I really enjoy showing creativity. And I even added a 5th one, which is I actually like to create through technology, which is also really fun. And that's the best part about this exercise is this is only you defining these things. There is no right or wrong answer, up or down, black or white. They always show shades of gray. Because remember, we don't do black and white thinking. We understand things that resonate with us and that also give us truth to ensure that we align with the right things. And once you do this exercise, I want you to keep these 8 values and virtues in a safe place and revisit them from time to time. Because as we'll talk about later in journaling, you're going to start to see some patterns that actually show you may not 100% be aligned in some ways with some of your virtues or value system. And it gives you permission to being able to change those as you start uncovering more about yourself, learning more about the world, and understanding more about the vast unknown of your mind. And just to finally bring it home, remember that values are the colors of your palette. The virtues are the tools that sit next to it. But nothing will actually happen until you pick it up and work through it and paint. And with that, thanks for listening. I just ask that if this episode resonated with you, please go ahead and subscribe, review, and like it on your favorite podcast service. It does help us out a lot to get the word out. You can find us on anywhere you can find your podcast and also on YouTube. Also, you can check out our website at theresonantidentity.com for all past episodes and information that is available to you through the exercises that are available as you go through this. I also ask that if you do have specific questions or wish to reach out, you can email us at mail@theresonantidentity.com. We'll gladly look at your comments and we may even read some on air. Have fun, be safe, know who you are and what you stand for, and make good choices aligned with your true and chosen identity, since you now know what that means. Stay safe out there. Goodbye for now.